right, hello everyone. It's great to see this turnout. Welcome to MCLA and our first presentation in this semester's Green Living Seminar. I'm Elena Traister in the Environmental Studies Department. This semester's Green Living Seminar is organized around the theme of sustainable food and farming. All presentations are free and open to the public. They take place on Thursdays at 5:30 here in the Feigenbaum Center for Science and Innovation, room 121. Today's presentation will last about 45 minutes with an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And a quick announcement for next week's presentation. We hope you'll all come back on Thursday, February 7th. Judith Schwartz is a journalist and author of Cows Save the Planet and Water in Plain Sight. We'll be presenting a lecture titled Cows Save the Planet, Soil, Climate, and the Promise of Regenerative Agriculture. Today's presentation on organic certification, the story behind the label, will be given by Laura Davis, Organic Certification Assistance Coordinator and Soil Technical Advisor with the Massachusetts chapter of the Northeast Organic Farming Association. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elena. Everybody hear me okay? Great. Welcome, everybody. I have a specific theme behind my presentation. Elena and I talked on the phone, and she gave me some things that I should be talking about, so I did design the presentation around those requests. So just a little bit about my organic story. I'm hoping it's a little bit small for the people in the back, so I'll be talking about it. You don't need to read it. I was a backyard gardener in my past career. I had a 30-year corporate career and was shown the parking lot. And that I said, how am I going to afford my CSA on unemployment? So I said, I have to double my yield in my gardens. How am I going to do that? First thing I did was attend the Bionutrient Food Association training to find out how to remineralize my soil to double my yields and make my quality of my food much better than I had been growing. I also worked for a year in Barrie at the Many Hands Organic Farm for Julie Rawson. She has a 150 member CSA. And I learned a lot there from April through December, all about growing vegetables. And I started Long Life Farm in Hopkinton in 2011, and then Certified Organic in 2013. I actually, at the time, was a board member of the Northeast Organic Farming Association, and I was at a board meeting, and I said, I don't know what to do here. I have all these questions. Who can I talk to? And they looked at me like I had a third eye. I said, how could we be the Northeast Organic Farming Association and not be able to help me with my organic certification? Well, be careful what you ask for, because then you become the person that helps people with their organic certification. And so I've been very involved with NOFA over the years, since about 2011. I am now the Certification Assistance Coordinator. I also do soil technical advising, and I'm currently the president of the board of directors. At the time, we got trained by Bay State certifiers to help farmers navigate the process of organic certification. And farmers would call me, and I'd sit down with them, and we'd go through the paperwork, and they'd ask questions that didn't make sense to them. And it was a huge service. And Bay State realized the files they were getting were all of a sudden complete with no questions. And there wasn't a lot of back and forth before they were able to get their reviewers and their inspectors assigned. And so they asked me at that point to come to work for them as an organic inspector. So I'm currently an organic inspector. I inspect about 70 operations every year. About 40 of those are farms, and then the other 30 are processors who make things from roasting coffee, organic coffee, to pizza crust, bagels, to soda pop, to all sorts of things that people are putting the organic label on. And I also have been through the International Organic Inspectors Association training for crop inspectors and processors, which is a requirement to be an inspector. And then Bay State puts you through the ringer and has you shadow them for about 15 different inspections before they let you out on your own. This is actually a picture of our CSA. And I'll talk a little bit more about the farm in a bit. Was anybody in the room involved in putting together the standards for the National Organic Program years ago? Okay. I thought I would just give a quick history because it's been a long time. There's been a lot of people involved in organic standards and setting them over the years. Originally, Oregon was the first state that passed an organic program in 1973, and 21 states followed. They all had very dissimilar standards. And so there was this outpouring of people in the organic community, organic farmers, organic food businesses, State's Department of Agriculture, the Farm Bureau. They all petitioned Congress to come up with a standard that could be used on the federal level so that there was consistency across the board. And so federal regulation of organic labeling would establish the national organic standards, and they would also promote fair trade, because if you could imagine being a food business in Oregon and not being able to ship your organic product to California because of the difference in standards, it didn't help promote commerce. So that was another driving factor behind it. Okay, so finally, in 1990, the Organic Foods Production Act was authorized, and the National Organic Program was part of that act, and it was to be managed by the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. The act established the National Organic Standards Board, which is 15 folks who represent different organic farms, and I have another slide about them in a second. The National Organic Program would define organic standards of organic agriculture, and they would also manage and decide on the national list. The national list are the inputs that organic farmers are allowed to use. And so this act was finally published in the Federal Register in 2000, but not really fully implemented until 2002. So if you can imagine, the act in 1990, and then 12 years later, finally, it goes into place. Long, long time. There was a lot of arguing, debating, negotiating throughout that whole time, and they finally came up with a set of rules that most people were happy with. But they felt that the things that could be added to that could be added later. And so we compare this time in 2002, or actually let's compare the time from 1973 to 1980 with the situation we're in today, because there's a lot of disagreement with what's going on out there in the organic label, and we'll talk about some of those things. Okay, so the organic practice standards, this is a very brief overview. If anybody has any specific questions about what farmers are allowed to do, or what processors are allowed to do, or what livestock farmers are allowed to do, you can ask. But these are some of the basics for crop farmers: to use certified organic seeds and planting stock, to rotate their crops so that they're not planted in the same place every year. Soil fertility and nutrient crop management is a really big part of the National Organic Program. So you have to constantly look at how you're going to grow your fertility. And those sort of things are practices that the inspector will inspect every year when they come out. Crop, weed, pest, and disease practice standards. You know, it's not as easy as just using an OMRI approved product. OMRI stands for Organic Materials Review Institute, and they'll put their manufacturers of certain fertilizer will put a label called OMRI on their bag so that people know that that's been approved for organic use. But some of those products are restricted. There's something called approved, there's something called restricted, and there's something called prohibited. If it's prohibited, you can't use it at all, and if it's restricted, you have to use it almost as a last resort after having initiated various cultural practices. For example, if I want to use a organically approved fungicide on my tomatoes, I have to ensure that I've picked a tomato that perhaps is a good seed that can ward off certain diseases. I also have to make sure that I trellis it properly, prune it properly, space it properly. These are cultural practices that I have to follow. If I still find that I'm going to get late blight, I can use the fungicide. That's kind of what I mean by the standards you have to follow before you can use some of these products. So this is one of the main reasons when I hear some farmers at farmers markets say, oh, well, I'm handshake organic, or I use organic practices. Drives me up the wall, Because if anybody really knew what the standards were, and they said they're following, why would they do that? Why would they follow those silly things if they didn't really have to? Okay? So it's a kind of a point of contention with certified organic farmers when other farmers say that they are using organic practices. Okay, so record keeping requirements are a big deal in organic certification. The good news is that most businesses have to keep these type of records anyway. So they're not so onerous. Okay, so this is a little bit about the National Organic Standards Board, and you may have heard a lot of news about the NOSB. Twice a year they have these meetings where they get together and talk about that national list, talk about taking things off, talk about putting some on, and other standards as well. There's a requirement in the Act that says the 15 public volunteers have to be made up of these specific groups. 4 owners or operators of organic farms, 2 owners or operators of organic handling operations, that would be a food processor, like, for example, Real Pickles would be that type of a company. 1 retail store owner who handles significant amounts of organics, 3 people with conservation or environmental protection experience, and 3 people who represent public or consumer interests. 1 expert in toxicology, ecology, or biochemistry, and 1 member from a USDA accredited certifier. Now the certifiers are the ones that actually send the inspector out, and they're the ones we apply to for certification. Okay, so this is the organic industry. It's over $50 billion annually in sales. It's only 5% of the total food market, so it's still a very small part of the food industry. Its growth right now is about 6% per year. That's come down from double digits over the last few years. But the rest of the food market is only growing at 1%. So it is still growing faster than the other food areas. Unfortunately, organic cropland only makes up 1% of our total acreage in the United States. It's a very small number. There are currently about 30,000 certified operations, so those are operations that are either processing food, they're growing food, or they're producing livestock, or wild crops, or cranberries, or any of the things that you can get certified, mushrooms. And there are currently 80 USDA accredited certifiers. So those 80 certifiers do 30,000 inspections every year, because being certified, you have to have an inspection every year as part of the process. Certification can be had for crops, processors, livestock, and some of those other things I mentioned, mushrooms. Okay, so Elena had asked me to talk a little bit about why I decided to certify our farm when we started. I am a new farmer. As I mentioned, I've been in corporate America for 30 years. This is my 9th season growing vegetables, and we have about 2¼ acres. We certified in our 2nd year. We lease our land. We don't own it. We do own a couple of acres of our own, but it's all trees, so there's not much but mushrooms that will grow there. We are a low-till operation. You may be hearing a lot more about no-till in the world today. It's a way of preserving the microorganisms in the soil, the mycorrhizae fungi, the bacteria, the nematodes, all of those things that help us grow. We don't want to chew them up with the rototiller. So we actually did start with a tiller, and now for this will be our 3rd year of doing no-till farming. So it does represent some challenges, but we hope that in the long run we see the holy grail of better productivity, better food quality, and longer shelf life. We currently, these are our farm shares. We have 85 families we grow for, and we do a couple of farmers markets. We have 1 high tunnel that we grow some winter greens in, and we have 1 small greenhouse that we grow our seedlings in. And we utilize the Albrecht method of soil balancing, which is when I referred to the Bionutrient Food Association course, they teach people how to do this method. And Albrecht was a soil scientist in the 30s or 40s in Missouri. And he discovered that there was an ideal soil saturation rate, which is, if you think about sand, you know how water goes right through it and it doesn't really hold much of anything in the way of nutrients. But if you have a rich humus soil, it can take a lot of rain. It can hold on to a lot of nutrients. So if you think about all of the negative ions on a clay colloid, those attach to minerals. So all the minerals like calcium is a double positive charge, and the colloid has a negative charge, so it sticks to the colloid. When you have the ideal soil percentage, Albrecht said it was 68% calcium, 14% magnesium, and 5% potassium. So when we talk about Albrecht, that's what we're talking about. And that's the type of soil analysis we do for farmers and gardeners at NOFA as well. And we currently are growing about 30,000 pounds of produce. Okay, so why did I choose to certify? The main reason really was because that's the way my family was procuring groceries. You know, we would buy organic milk and cheese and eggs and produce. And so when we started our farm, we wanted to be certified organic. We really felt that the organic growing was more of a natural process. We're not into chemicals and weed killers and that sort of thing, so we just felt a lot more comfortable going this route. And the one thing that I really felt strongly about was that the organic label would give us instant credibility with the market that we were trying to get. In our community is a fairly bedroom suburban community. It's not the bedrock of agriculture. So there's a lot of people shopping at Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and so I just felt like it would give us instant credibility. And we sold out all of our shares the first year within a month and have never had trouble selling them. So it works that way. The thing about being organic is that you have somebody looking over your shoulder. You have an inspector who's actually coming to verify what you say you're doing. And that gives the customers confidence in the organic label. Organic has had a growing demand, and organic has tended to bring a higher price. At our farmers market, we are not the highest price. The conventional farm produce is the higher price. Go figure. That's Kelly's, by the way. You know. Oh, I know. It was very cost effective to certify, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit further here. And record keeping for us was not an issue because I've always been sort of a type A anyway, and I like doing Excel spreadsheets, so it's just me. Okay, so what are some of those myths? You know, you hear all the time, well, I don't want to certify because, you know, it's going to cost too much money. Well, it doesn't cost a lot of money to certify, especially if you're a small farm, you know. So, you know, our certification fee is about $800, but we get $750 back from the cost share program that's part of the Farm Bill. So our net cost for certification is only $50. Not expensive at all, okay? And that fee is based upon your revenue of organic sales. So if you're selling $1 million of coffee beans that are organic, your fee might be $1,300. Still not, they're going to get $750 back. Still not a huge amount of money, okay? So that myth definitely is out there, but it really is not true. Organic certification paperwork is too onerous is another myth. It can be a little onerous on your first year because there's a lot more to fill out on the forms. But you're basically filling out an application that identifies your growing practices, which seeds you're using, which inputs you're using, and you list it all out. You have to draw a map of your fields, make a list of the things you've used over the last 3 years. The first year, it can be onerous. But after that, each renewal is fairly simple. You know, it might take me like a couple hours, maybe 3 or 4 hours to renew, send it in, and then the inspector comes out and inspects me again. So after the first year, it's not so bad. They like record keeping, and you have to keep track of certain things. Have to keep track of one of the things that the inspector will do when they come out is say, let's do a traceback exercise. So they'll look at my CSA harvest record and they say, okay, it looks like you harvested tomatoes. Can we trace this back? So we go from my harvest record back to my sales record for the CSA customer to show that they paid for their CSA. And then we go back to my production record, which shows the date it got harvested, the date it got transplanted, the date that it got seeded in the trays. And then I go back to the invoice from this company and show them that it was an organic seed. So that's full trace back all the way from seed to plate, basically. So that's some of the record keeping that has to be done in organic certification. Okay, another myth that people may not know is organic label products have 100% organic ingredients. Did everybody think that? Okay. It's not true, unless it says 100%. Well, it doesn't have to say it, but if a company makes a product, let's say it's an essential oil that's 100% organic, they can use 100% organic on their label and the organic USDA organic seal. But generally, most organic products that you see in the supermarket are 95% or above, okay? They're allowed to have 5% of that ingredient that is non-organic, as long as it doesn't have a GMO in it, as long as it is not produced with sewage sludge or irradiation. Those are the 3 rules. Okay, and that they can use a non-organic product if it's on the national list as well. It might be something like, what do you use to thicken your jam? Pectin is not, you can't find an organic pectin. If anybody sees one, let me know. But that's one of the products that is not available, certified organic, to make jam out of.
What are preservatives for the 5%?
It depends upon what it is. We'd have to look it up on the list. Things like citric acid are definitely on the list and allowable, but there are a lot of things that are not there. It's only a 2-page list. It's a pretty small list. Okay, so what are some of the challenges that the organic label is experiencing right now? I'm sure that you've read a lot about these things, but the first thing is there's been a lot of fraudulent imports coming in from mostly Turkey and other countries that are importing to Turkey and then Turkey coming into the U.S. 7 U.S. ports inspected found organic shipments treated with prohibited substances upon entry when found to have evidence of disease or pests. So they're being sprayed when they come to our ports. That's the crazy thing. And that we don't have enough enforcement to prevent this. We currently import 50% of the organic corn that we need. It's crazy. And we import 75% of the organic soybeans that we need. And that's all if any of you have driven out in the Midwest and West, you know that we grow these things, but they're mostly all conventional. So we import most of what we need. USDA allowed hydroponic to be labeled organic in January 2018. This was against the recommendation of the NOSB. Organic livestock and poultry practices rule was canceled in May of 2018. This was a brand new rule that had been debated and negotiated for over 10 years by all the organic stakeholders. This standard is all about livestock welfare, adequate space for chickens and for pigs and cattle, outdoor access. It was really bringing the standards up to what customers expected they were already, even though they weren't. And the NOSB recommendations have basically been ignored. Sorry, the NOSB recommendations have basically been ignored by the USDA, and this is a big, big problem. The farmers' seats were sometimes given up to other processors, and the NOSB recommended the livestock poultry rule, and they recommended that hydroponic be prohibited. But the USDA Agriculture and Marketing Service decided to take those steps, which is really unfortunate. And this really is what has challenged people's belief and confidence in the organic label. Okay, this is good news for me. I'm excited about this. There's 2 legal challenges. And one of them is to prevent hydroponic practices to be labeled. The Center for Food Safety's legal team is leading these charges. They have a lot of stakeholders who are supporting these legal challenges, so I'm hopeful that they're going to win. It's still early, but we'll see. The Center for Food Safety is also the lead legal team to reinstate the livestock and poultry rule. Okay, and so this, it's really crazy to, have those chickens jammed into these places where they can't roam, or to, you've all read about the beef lots and the CAFOs. Does everybody know what a CAFO stands for? Concentrated Concentrated agricultural feeding lot is basically what it is. It's a place where there's really no grass, and it's just sort of a dirt corral, and they do pack thousands of animals into these facilities, and they are a cause of a lot of these manure lagoons, and the cows are not really able to eat grass, which is what they're designed to do. Okay, so what are some of the impacts of the watering down of some of these standards? And this is really all very recent in the last year. The add-on labels are proliferating. You have farmers that are very angry and setting off and wanting to do their own add-on labels to the USDA organic label. All of these add-on labels, by the way, are requiring the farm to be certified organic first by the NOP. So this is add-on to the National Organic Program USDA label. Most of these also have a labor, social justice component to them. Paying our workers fair wages, living wages, and they all include the animal welfare issues that are in those standards that got canceled. One of them is called the Real Organic Project, and that is based in Vermont. And the other one is called the Regenerative Organic Certification, and that's being led by the Rodale Institute. Both of these add-ons are currently certifying operations. And so you might see some farms out there that have an ROC or an ROP next to their USDA organic label. So when I talk about this time in the history of the USDA, it does seem similar to what went on between 73 and 80, with every state having different standards, because now we're in a situation where these aren't just the only 2 add-on labels. You have the Agricultural Justice Project, and you have other add-ons that are all happening at the same time. So it really is a time when, if the consumer is not aware of these things, there's a lot of crazy things happening out there. Okay, before I go on to some questions, I just want to relate what I see when I inspect operations. So I don't want to leave you with the feeling of doom and gloom, because when I go to inspect operations, and I only have inspected operations in a few in New Hampshire, but mostly in Massachusetts, and a few in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Small farmers are definitely doing the right things when it comes to these rules. And so it's very rare for an inspector to go out and see an issue. Sometimes processors are a little bit less educated about the standards, and they sometimes get themselves into a little trouble because they're not following a standard. But the good news is that they can correct that, and they get issued nonconformances. Perhaps they didn't take an inventory. So with processors, we have an exercise called a mass balance exercise. So if you were making bagels, for example, when I go in, I'm going to ask to see your inventory for a certain time period. So let's just say for a whole year. Starting and ending inventory, and how much did you purchase and receive? That's the amount that you used. Okay, now tell me how much you shipped in bagels, and how much did you have in starting and ending inventory? And do those two figures match? Or did they need more flour than they actually bought in their organic product? Does that make sense? It's okay if they have more flour ingredient than they made in organic bagels, but they better not have made more organic bagels than they had organic flour. Do you see where we're going with that? Exactly. So, and it's critical for them to show an organic certificate that is current for every single one of their ingredients. So you can imagine some of these companies that are making granola bars or granola or anything with a lot of ingredients. They might have 10, 12, 13 ingredients. They have to have an organic certificate for each one of those ingredients. And they have to show the inspector how they made it, what is the recipe, what percentage of each product goes into that recipe. And if they bought the ingredient from Europe or one of the countries that has a cooperating certification program, which is Canada, Europe, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, they have to have an import certificate from the appropriate organic certifier overseas. So it's a very onerous process for these processors, and it is very complicated for them. Farmers are a little different because their whole practice of farming has to do with the organic standards, whereas food processors are a little different. They really have to learn all of the standards, and so that's a little bit more difficult for them. But, so I want to give you some confidence that at least the 70 operations that I've seen, everybody is committed to doing the right thing. Where you have to kind of think about your shopping is when you're looking at some of these national brands, very large companies that are not local, especially if they're using any soybeans or wheat, right? Because you don't know where that wheat is coming from. So what questions do you have? Because I'm sure that you have some out there. Yes?
What is the argument against hydroponics being organic?
That's a good question. So if you read through the National Organic Program regulations, every other paragraph talks about soil and what we do to make the soil more fertile. We're planting cover crops to increase the amount of microorganisms, the natural nitrogen in the soil. We're trying to increase the photosynthesis of a plant so that they have more carbohydrates and protein needed for that growth of the plant so they can push more of those exudates back into the soil for the microorganisms. So it's really a process of building healthy soil. And the entire program was written based upon that premise. Not to say that you can't have a healthy crop grown in a hydroponic operation with a liquid medium, but it should be labeled such so that you know it's not grown in soil.
Could there be a different certifying group or system?
Or a separate add-on perhaps that says, we're not using anything prohibited according to the National Organic Program, but we're also not using soil. I think that would probably make a lot of people satisfied.
Or I would say hydroponically grown somewhere.
Yeah, just like most people want to see if it's a GMO inside the product, right? I heard the class talking about labels a lot earlier. There's a lot of confusion around labels. Well, now you know. If you go to the store and buy a head of lettuce, it's possible. It could be organic, but it's also possible it's not grown in soil. It's important to most people. Yes?
I was wondering why you didn't mention South American countries. You said if they need an import certificate from Europe and Asia, different places, but why not South America?
The U.S. has an agreement with the countries I mentioned. Their standards are close enough to the U.S. standards that they don't have to go through the extra effort of approving them. It's not to say that companies can't use products from South America. It's just that those countries' standards of organic certification are so dissimilar to what we have in the U.S. that there has to be a little bit different burden of proof for them. But they can be those products. There's a ton of green coffee beans that come in from South America. Most of the coffee beans are coming from South America, except for the Sumatra. Yes.
So how can somebody label honey as organic? Because it just seems counterintuitive.
It does to me too. I saw in Whole Foods they had one that was, and the origin was Turkey and India. It's like, how does that work? Baystate does not approve honey products because most farms would have to be over 2 miles in radius because that's pretty much where the bee goes. So if they had contiguous 2 acres, they might be able to get a certification, but that's pretty rare, at least in Massachusetts. So normally you're not going to see an organic honey unless you have. You see the one that's coming from India and Brazil, I think. Yeah, I would definitely buy the local honey. Question up there? Yes.
I wonder if you have, as elements of your certification and inspection process, sort of ways to encourage efficient, smart water use and irrigation, and also to sort of discourage water pollution.
That's a great question. Let me start with the second part first. So many farms do soil testing. And although in organic certification, it's not required to do a soil test unless you want to use trace elements or micronutrients. So those would be things like boron, molybdenum, silica, cobalt, copper, manganese. If you use those, you have to show on a soil report that you have a deficiency. But the soil nutrient management rules are really through the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture. On some of these big farms, they will look at the amount of phosphorus being used by the farmer, and nitrogen for that matter, to ensure that it doesn't end up in waterways. One of the things that the organic inspector looks for is evidence of erosion, especially whether or not they're using the cover crops. Have they planted the cover crops, and do they have their soil covered? It's very important. Yeah. But generally, the organic inspector is not necessarily looking for the phosphorus like the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture does. Good question, though. Yes?
Can you speak to how the future of the provisions of the Farm Bill with marijuana and industrial hemp, how that could play a role into organic certification?
Yes. So now that agricultural hemp has been approved as part of the Farm Bill, so agricultural hemp is any cannabis that is less than 0.3% THC, or the terpenoid that actually makes you high. So agricultural hemp is defined as less than 0.3 THC. And it's now legal on the federal level, which means that because the NOP is a federal program, it can be organically certified. So if somebody's growing hemp, you have to go through the MDAR first, Massachusetts Department of Agriculture, to get your license. Show them where you're getting your seed. Has to be a certified hemp seed. Has to show the percentage of THC and CBD, generally. And then once you're ready for your harvest, they come back out, MDAR does, and takes the sample. And if it has changed and goes above 0.3% THC, they burn it and destroy it. So Baystate Organic Certifiers is currently putting the forms together that hemp farmers will need to certify their hemp, and that will be a doable process. It's not up there right now, but I would say within the next 60 days it should be on Baystate's organic. Cannabis with high THC amounts is completely another story because it's still illegal on the federal level. And so since the NOP is a federal program, certification is not going to be allowed. But there's all these pop-up certification agencies that are not NOP accredited, USDA accredited. And they are called, I think it's called Clean Cannabis. Clean Cannabis will come and certify your cannabis farm to ensure that you're not using anything bad on it. And you can use that label for people if you wish. But Massachusetts, everything you harvest anyway has to be tested for pesticides. So it may be a moot point to get certified because it's either clean or it's not. There isn't a single fertilizer or insecticide or fungicide that's been approved for cannabis yet. So the EPA won't allow you to use anything on pot plants if you're going to sell them. So it's kind of a convoluted situation, but yeah. Yes?
If you were to compare starting out with certified organic seed versus non-organic seed grown under organic practices and cultivation, and you compare the final product, except for the DNA in that very non-organic seed, what is the outcome? What does it look like?
I've never done a side-by-side comparison. Many farmers swear by a certain variety of non-organic, and they are allowed to use that if they can't find a commercially available organic one that takes its place. So you often will have organic farmers using non-organic seed in certain situations. Until last year, you couldn't find an organic purple cauliflower. Now there is one. So whether or not they switch over to it is another question, but that's something the inspector always asks. What new organic seeds are you trialing this year? Because they have to tell you what percentage organic seeds they're using to non-organic. And as an inspector, I go through and look at all their seeds. I can see which ones they're using. I want to make sure that they're not coated with anything that's not compliant or that they're not using any GMO seeds. And I will, if they're low on their organic percentage of seed, that will be a point of concern in the inspection report. But it's hard to, I've never done a side-by-side comparison. I mean, most of the seeds that we would order around here are raised and bred for our climate. So, you know, we utilize high mowing from Vermont, high mowing seeds, Johnny's selected seeds from Maine, Fedco from Maine. There's some really great little seed growers, Fruition in the Finger Lakes. And then we also order some seeds from the Northwest, which has a bit of a similar climate. So do we have any aspiring farmers in the room? Oh, there must be somebody that's going to grow food. Okay. Yes.
We're doing berries. So you say the stock, not just the seed. So the bushes you buy, we bought them from Johnny's Seeds, but they should be organic too.
Well, you're not going to be able to find always the stock that's organic. So as long as you've managed it under organic conditions for at least a year, then after 1 year you can sell it as organic. Yeah, because oftentimes these stock are not available organic. I think it's going to be hard to find organic blueberry or even organic strawberry plants. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
What about maple syrup?
Maple syrup can be certified organic. Yes. That's right. Yes.
I was kind of wondering about the process of chickens being labeled as organic.
So the first thing to certify your chickens is to certify the land that they're foraging on. So it would be a crop plan first, and there's a separate application for poultry. So the chicken has to have organic food from its second or third day of life. So once you get the chicks from the company that you buy them for, if you don't, raise your own, or they have to start eating organic feed on the second or third day, and all the way through their life. and then you can certify them as organic. And the rule is that if you've been managing your farm for 3 years and you haven't added anything prohibited to your land, you can get certified right away. Start selling organic eggs and meat birds if you'd like. See, we have one aspiring farmer that's gonna save us all. Yes.
Except for that 6% statistic, where, like, you being involved in this as much as you have been, where do you see the future going with it?
Well, I really have been inspired by a lot of what's going on in the Midwest. You know, I'm born and raised in Chicago, so I'm a Midwest farmer's daughter. And, you know, you go there and you see just tons and tons of, you know, chemicals everywhere, and just nothing covering the ground in the winter. It's just completely dark soil, nothing else. But that's changing, and there's a lot of farmers in the conventional world that are starting to do no-till on very large acreage. And they are planting cover crops. They're really feeding the biology in the soil. You know, they are discontinuing or at least lessening their reliance on chemicals. And so I'm encouraged by that. You know, we do a lot of work and study on carbon sequestration at NOFA. And so, you know, you can't sequester a lot of carbon if you're using all those chemicals, because it just burns off the organic matter. So I'm encouraged by what's going on. There's a lot of people talking about mob grazing, which is the type of grazing of animals where they fence them into a smaller area, and they're actually eating the forage to a certain height, replicating what happened with the buffalo on the range hundreds of years ago. And it's bringing pasture lands back, and it's actually able to sequester a lot more carbon. And so I feel very hopeful that we can spread this message to bigger and more farmers, and hopefully make a big difference. And because agriculture can do a huge part to change the direction we're on as a planet. They can do a huge part. I mean, each percentage of organic matter in your soil, really, if you can get that up to above 5%, most of the Midwest soils right now are on 1 or 2. So they can't hold water, they can't hold nutrients, they can't become humus, they can't, you know, sequester carbon because they don't have anything green growing on them all year round. So as much as we can keep the ground covered with something green growing, the better off we're all going to be. But we have to spread the word quickly. Okay. Any other questions before we close up?
So I'd just like to say, in case anyone wants to come down individually, I think Laura will be around for a few minutes. Please do come down. I want to encourage everyone to come back next week. We'll talk a bit about regenerative agriculture with livestock. So that should be great. And thank you again very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody.